Hey everybody. Thank you so much for coming to listen to my talk. My name is Jo Franchetti and I am a developer advocate. I'm not actually at Samsung Internet anymore, as it says on the intro to this talk. I'm actually currently taking some time off work. If any of you are looking for a developer advocate at the moment, hit me up. I am also a coach and organizer at Code Bar London, which is a place where we teach underrepresented minorities in tech how to code. So I spend a lot of my time talking to developers from all around the world, to designers, to their teams from all seniority levels, and from many different walks of life. And I've started to notice some trends in behaviors amongst developers. Trends in behaviors, in beliefs, and in complaints amongst everybody who works in the tech industry. And to illustrate some of these, I'd like to tell you a story about a friend of mine. Let's call her Mo. And while I tell you about Mo, I'd like you to see if you recognize any of her behaviors in yourself. So Mo is a web developer. She's got a few years of experience under her belt, and she works on a medium-sized team with other developers in, let's say, a medium-sized organization. Now, Mo went to university like her teachers told her that she should, but she feels like maybe she chose the wrong course. But when she realized that halfway through the course, she was too afraid to change, because she thought that the people who were studying the course that she wanted to do would be way ahead of where she was. So instead, she graduated and decided to completely reskill, and she taught herself HTML and CSS and JavaScript with a view to becoming a web developer. But because she's self-taught, she's always had this sort of niggling worry, this fear that she doesn't know as much as everybody else. Sometimes she worries that she doesn't know the correct names or the correct techniques for the code that she's writing. But she doesn't want to ask her colleagues for help in case she lets on all the things that she doesn't know. She's worried that they'll judge her, or even worse, that they'll fire her. She imagines this sort of look of shock on their faces where they turn around and they go, "What? You don't know that? That's so basic." So Mo tries to keep up with all the web technologies by reading tutorials and by attending events. But sometimes she feels like everyone else just gets the things that she's still struggling to learn. There are people out there who are writing new and awesome frameworks and tools, while she's still struggling to learn the previous one. And sometimes she just feels like a fraud. Mo follows a lot of web celebrities on various social media platforms to help her stay up to date. She's amazed at how much all the speakers at the events that she's attending and these social media influencers are able to get done. They're creative geniuses. They never have to ask for help. They never get stuck. Their days just seem to have more hours than hers does. And they've all got side projects on the go as well. Mo's got a few ideas for side projects, but she doesn't know how to get started with some of them. And the other ones, she just can't seem to get finished. She's worried that people are going to judge her projects for being too unoriginal or too simple, so she never actually puts them in the public eye. She just keeps tweaking them indefinitely. And to be honest, sometimes she just doesn't have the energy to face a side project. Being at a computer all day at work is enough without coming home to sit at one too. And her worry about not keeping up with everybody and not being good enough starts to bother her throughout the day. Sometimes she's so worried that she can't concentrate on what she's supposed to be doing at work. And then she worries that she's wasted time worrying. So she works longer hours and she takes fewer and shorter breaks. But she still doesn't want to ask for help because that would give her secret away, the secret that she's a fraud. And in order to hide how worried she is, she starts attending more events and joining web-related organizations, and people often tell her that they don't know how she manages to fit everything in. But she smiles and shrugs off their comments. That means that her cover is working, that they'll never find out that she's a fraud. Mo sometimes finds that when she gets home from work, she doesn't have the time or energy to deal with her household chores or even with seeing friends. And her diet has become quite poor because of all the free pizza that she's eating at these events. And not only that, she's drinking more alcohol than she used to. But it's a free bar. And even though she gets to bed late, she struggles to sleep at night because she can't seem to get her brain to switch off. It likes to switch between worrying about her workload and running lists of all the jobs that she still hasn't got done. And her ability to concentrate at work starts to suffer because she's not sleeping well. And she ends up procrastinating a lot instead of getting work done. She'll send emails, she'll check social media, anything to actually put off getting started, because she's worried that when she does, her work will be judged. And then she panics when she thinks that she's not got enough done during the day. And her daily stand-up meetings become a dread every morning. Maybe her team is going to wonder what she's been up to all day. Maybe they're going to fire her. By the way, her team think that she's doing fine. They only ever see the product of all the extra hours that she's putting in, and not the hours of procrastination that come before it. And Mo constantly looks to external sources to validate her choices. She never believes in herself that she's good enough or has managed enough, and she puts down her own work constantly and instead lives for her next Twitter likes or her emails from her boss saying that her work has increased revenue. She never sees any of that revenue increase herself, though, because she's too afraid to ever ask for a promotion, because promotions only ever happen to people who know what they're doing, right? One day, Mo gets an email from her colleague saying that she made a mistake in some work that she handed into the team. And she runs to the bathroom because she knows she's going to start crying and she doesn't want anyone to see. She cries uncontrollably for an hour, and once she's done, she cleans up her face and goes back to her desk and pretends that nothing happened. Everyone else seems to be able to cope with their workload. They just tell her to buck up her ideas if she tried to tell them that she wasn't coping. And occasionally, Mo can't face going into the office. And on those days, she calls in sick. But she never tells anyone that it's her mental health that's suffering and not her physical health. The only time that Mo feels like she can truly relax from work is when she's at the pub. She finds that alcohol helps her to forget to worry quite so much. The only problem being her tendency to drink too much, because the joy of forgetting is quite addictive. And one night, after drinking herself into oblivion, Mo gets on her bike and she cycles home. She doesn't really remember the journey. She doesn't remember much of the night at all, if she's honest, but she does remember cycling into a car outside of her house and catapulting herself painfully across the road. Thankfully for Mo, a few days of concussion and some bruising and scratches were enough to make her realize that she needed to start facing her fears and her anxieties. She started therapy, and she started learning about the causes of anxiety and stress. And she started to learn that the kind of mental health issues that she was facing, those are anxiety related to imposter syndrome and perfectionism, actually plague many of us who work in the tech industry. But often we don't talk about them. So if you recognized yourself in any of Mo's behavior, I'd like to talk you through some of it now. And as an aside, my Twitter DMs are open if you'd like to talk to me about your own experiences. So I'd like to give you an introduction to some of the issues that Mo faced, along with some questions to ask yourself, some methods of recognition, and techniques that you can employ so that you don't ever go through what Mo did. Because I really believe that the tech industry is an amazing place to be. We're changing the face of so many walks of life, and our own mental health has to be one of them. So let's get started. Firstly, let's talk about imposter syndrome. You might have heard it called imposter phenomenon or imposter experience. This is the feeling that you haven't really earned any of your accomplishments, that by fraud or just dumb luck, you've ended up in the same place as others who you deem worthy, and you don't feel that you deserve to be there. And to call it a syndrome kind of downplays how universal this experience is. It's not a disease, it's not an abnormality, and it isn't necessarily tied to depression, anxiety, or self-esteem, but it is prevalent in highly skilled and highly intelligent people. just like the kind of people who like to work in the tech industry. So where do these feelings come from? People like yourselves who are skilled and intelligent tend to think that your colleagues are also skilled and intelligent. But this can sometimes cause you to judge yourself against them and to do so harshly and unfairly. This judgment can cause you to believe that you don't deserve the opportunities, the qualifications, or the accolades that you've earned, or that in some way the skills that you've gathered aren't worth as much as those of the people around you. And this can sometimes be coupled with a belief that any qualifications or accolades that you have earned somehow aren't worthwhile anymore or aren't praiseworthy. If you manage to get them, everybody else could probably get them too. Have you ever striven to achieve something only to feel like when you did, it came too easily? Or that someone maybe made a mistake in awarding it to you? Or that once you've got it, it's somehow not enough and you have to start striving for the next thing and the next thing? Imposter syndrome doesn't let you feel pride or joy in any of your accomplishments. And another problem with imposter syndrome is that our fears can be intensified by a phenomenon known as pluralistic ignorance. This is where we doubt ourselves in private, but we never voice our doubts because we believe that we're alone in thinking this way because no one else is talking about their doubts either. And this can be especially exacerbated by things like social media, where people tend to present only their best versions of themselves, their achievements and their successes. People rarely publish their mistakes, their self-doubts, or their own foibles. So it becomes really difficult to know how we're doing in comparison with our peers. And it's difficult to know whether or not they're finding certain tasks hard, or whether they ever get stuck or need to ask for help, or whether they ever doubt themselves. This means that there's no easy way to dismiss these feelings that we're less capable than those around us. So, with a view to sharing how prevalent this feeling is, I'd like to show you some very famous people who have also felt imposter syndrome. Firstly, the author Maya Angelou. Even after writing 11 books and winning many, many awards, still felt like she hadn't really earned her accomplishments. She said, "I've written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everyone, and they're going to find me out." Even the talented and seemingly confident Emma Watson says she's afraid that people will find out that she's a fraud and that she doesn't deserve any of what she's achieved. And if you can believe it, even Albert Einstein experienced imposter syndrome. He described himself as an involuntary swindler whose work didn't deserve as much attention as it had received. Now, talking with others about imposter syndrome is the best way to start recognizing these fears for what they are. They're normal, but they're immaterial. And they're certainly unfactual. Whenever I'm worrying that everyone else around me knows more than me, or that I don't belong, I like to think of this thing that I call Schrodinger's imposter syndrome. This is where I have convinced myself that all of my peers are far more intelligent and worthy and brilliant and more accomplished than I am. And yet, they're also so gullible and stupid that clever me has convinced them that I belong amongst them. Now, these two things cannot exist alongside each other and both be true. My logic is fallible, and therefore likely so is my disbelief in myself. We may never be able to banish imposter experience entirely, but we can have open and frank conversations with each other, with our peers, with our seniors and our mentors, and even our friends, and build confidence in some of the facts. You are talented, you are capable, and you belong in the tech industry. So the second thing that I'd like to talk to you about is perfectionism. Now, when I was preparing for my first ever tech interview, I was given a very common piece of advice that I'm sure many of you might have heard as well. If an interviewer ever asks you what your weaknesses are, just tell them you're a perfectionist. Now, this particular piece of advice was given to me and countless others by my boss at the time. And it's the kind of statement that makes everybody roll their eyes and sigh. We all know that it's a cop-out answer. The idea is that you're not really revealing any weakness because employers want to hire perfectionists. Perfectionists do the best work, right? They do perfect work. And it never occurred to me at the time, as I naively accepted this piece of advice, that I'd grow to learn the real truth behind this statement. If you look it up on Wikipedia, it says that perfectionism in psychology is a personality trait characterized by a person striving for flawlessness and setting high performance standards accompanied by critical self-evaluation and concerns regarding others' evaluation. Which sounds great. If I was an employer, I'd want to hire someone who strives for flawlessness, who sets high standards and cares about others' evaluations. They sound like just the kind of person I want to employ. However, perfectionism can actually be a blocker to achievement. Imagine that you're constantly aiming for perfection, not greatness, not good enough, actual perfection. You can't help but set yourself up to fail. Achieving perfection is not something that happens very often. And perfectionists measure our own self-worth by how able we are to achieve this perfection, by how much we can accomplish. And when we don't attain those accomplishments, we can be very harsh on ourselves. The trouble is that for perfectionists, performance is intertwined with our sense of self. And when we don't succeed, we don't just feel disappointed in how we did, we feel disappointment in who we are. And perfectionists often engage in something called black and white thinking, or you might have heard it called catastrophic thinking, where everything becomes either perfect or terrible. Even things that most people would call good enough or even great fall into the terrible category because they're not perfect. An example would be maybe fear of publishing a piece of work because somebody might find a single error in it. The idea of somebody finding an error becomes this end-of-world scenario rather than something manageable that you can deal with as and when it happens. And the problem is that the tech industry, and honestly capitalism as a whole, love it when we strive for perfection. They want us to be constantly building better things, being faster, being the most successful, earning the most money, then we can spend it on becoming even better. And tech employers often encourage the unhealthy belief that we should be constantly striving to be working harder, creating more, learning everything, as if learning everything was even possible. And perfectionist employees will pressure themselves into tiredness, into depression, into decision paralysis and burnout, all while continuing to turn in excellent work, never daring to ask for help, because that would be admitting that they can't do something. So if you're not sure whether you've ever had perfectionist tendencies yourself, I'd like to ask you some questions. And firstly, the one that got me was this. Would you consider yourself a perfectionist? Now, if you answered, as I did, something along the lines of, oh no, there's no way I'm good enough to be a perfectionist, then I've got some news for you, I'm afraid. Have you ever felt like you can't start a project because you can't decide on how to start? And sometimes figuring out the perfect way to start is a blocker to ever actually getting started. So instead, you procrastinate, you'll read social media, you'll even do housework just so you don't have to face getting started on the project. Have you ever left a project unfinished because you couldn't get it exactly how you wanted it? The project feels not quite perfect just yet, so you keep adding bits and you keep tweaking bits, and you're still not ready to actually show it to anyone yet or to get anyone's opinion on it. Have you ever worried and worried and worried about a piece of work and put it off and delayed until the last second, right up until the deadline when you've finally been forced to do something, and then been surprised and felt maybe a little bit silly at how it was all fine in the end, and how everybody thought your work was great, and all that worrying that you did was maybe just stressing yourself out needlessly? Have you ever felt afraid or ashamed of asking for help from a colleague? Because maybe that would show that you don't know something, or that you can't manage something. And perfect people know everything, right? Better just to try that 1,000th Google search than to turn to the person next to you and ask them for help. So what can we do, both as perfectionists and friends and colleagues of perfectionists, to make the tech industry a safer and kinder place to work? So the first thing that I would say is you have to give yourself time. Sometimes you just can't tackle a problem. It doesn't mean that you'll never be able to tackle it. It just means that you can't do it right now. Maybe your brain isn't in quite the right space. Give yourself some time. And don't let feelings of guilt or shame take over. Take a half an hour walk, or even a whole day, or even 2 days away from the problem. But schedule in a start time for when you're going to look at it again. And you'll be surprised by how you find it easier after that break. Set deadlines and goals and targets and schedules that are realistic. Either set them for yourself or get a friend or a colleague to help you set them. Too much freedom is quite stifling for perfectionists. We need something that we're aiming for that we can then improve upon. Given a blank canvas, we have a tendency to procrastinate forever or to start and abandon multiple projects until we find the one that we think is perfect. Setting achievable goals allows you to strive for excellence while removing that paralyzing nature of the open-ended task. And remember that perfect is the enemy of great. Perfectionism isn't about setting high standards. It's about setting unrealistic standards. How many projects have you thrown away because you couldn't get them exactly perfect, or you were worried that others would judge them? How much of your own time have you wasted on this? Or how many times have you struggled for hours on a problem because you were too afraid to ask for help? Getting something out is better than abandoning all of your hard work. And you'll likely be surprised that not only will nobody else notice these things that you think are glaring imperfections, but they'll actually think that your work was great. And acknowledge that you are your own most harsh critic. Most people don't expect perfection from others. Perfectionists only think that they do. No one is going to judge you as harshly as you judge yourself. It's okay to make mistakes. Everybody does it. It's even okay to release imperfect code. It's okay if somebody calls you up on a mistake that you made. You can thank them, you will learn from it, and you'll both move on with your lives, and the world will not end. One thing that has really helped me is to think my fears through to their logical conclusion. Instead of this catastrophic or black and white thinking, like if I make a mistake in front of my colleagues, that will be the end of everything. Consider what the end of everything might actually look like. Consider the worst possible outcome of your fears, and then be honest with yourself about how likely that scenario actually is. And then you can start to consider how the event would actually play out and how bad or not it would actually be. So, for example, I used to struggle with getting blog posts published because I was afraid that once they were in the public eye, everybody would comment and be like, you were wrong, you missed this thing, I found this flaw in your code here. And my fear of having those comments made me think that not only would it be the end of my career, it would be the end of all of my friendships, nobody would ever want to hire me again, basically a comet would fall into the earth and everybody would die. And when you start to think your fears through to their logical conclusion, you realize, to be honest, not that many people read my blog posts. And the ones who do certainly don't care enough to go through every single line of code and find a flaw. And not only that, if they do find a flaw, that's great. I can change it and update it, and then my code won't have a flaw. It's absolutely fine. The thing that really helps me is getting someone to say, what then, to me when I'm trying to think through my fears. So, somebody finds a mistake in my blog post. What then? Oh, well, I change it. And what then? Well, then it doesn't have a mistake. Great. Talking through your fears with somebody else can really help, and it will save you hours of worrying. And the more that I've spoken about my experiences with perfectionism, the more people have told me that they have had similar problems. And with the tendency for intelligence and overachievement in tech industry employees, it's perhaps unsurprising that so many people suffer from perfectionism. The more we talk about these issues with our friends and our colleagues and our managers and our mentees, the less stigma we will feel around dealing with them and about helping others through them. Because everybody goes through rough periods. We don't have to downplay it. Coding is hard, and we can validate our own and each other's experiences when we say something along the lines of, yeah, this is hard sometimes. It's okay. You're having a hard time. The more open and communicative we are about mental health in the tech industry, the more pleasant a working experience we can make it for everyone. So the final issue that I'd like to talk to you about is anxiety, and I'd like you to really watch for this in yourselves. Anxiety is an entirely natural and normal feeling. Worrying about a new experience or a scary situation or maybe a deadline is completely understandable. However, anxiety becomes a problem when you're feeling it generally, or if you're feeling it over a prolonged period of time. Now, there's a theory that says that we learn anxiety when we're very, very small. When we're babies, we're helpless and we rely entirely on other people giving us everything that we need for our continued survival. And so that anxiety that we feel is an anxiety whether we're lovable enough for people to continue to allow our existence, basically. And we worry that we're not good enough to be loved. And sometimes that worry never goes away. And we need constant reassurance that we're doing the right things and that we're doing okay in comparison to everybody else. In the last few years, we've been given some very powerful tools to check how we're doing in comparison with everybody else. Of course, I'm talking about social media. We can get instant validation on our decisions and our life choices. Posting on social media gives us a way of presenting the lives that we want others to see. This beautiful, idealized version of ourselves. And what we don't realize is that everybody else is also putting up an idealized, beautiful version of themselves, but we judge our real selves against this idealized version, and we feel like we're coming up short, which can constantly stoke the fear that we're not doing as well as everyone else. Now, anxiety has many symptoms to look out for. So you might feel an increased heart rate occasionally when you're looking at social media or when you're working. Heart palpitations or fast breathing, feeling a tightness or a weight in your chest, finding it difficult to fall asleep or difficult to stay asleep. Sweaty palms and headaches can also be symptoms of anxiety. And none of these things are things that we want to have to deal with on a regular basis. And both imposter syndrome and perfectionism can be causes of anxiety and can impact on your mental well-being. And record numbers of people at the moment are experiencing poor mental health, according to the World Health Organization. Now, a good prediction of anxiety is self-criticism, which perfectionists and those with imposter syndrome are really good at. And worsening matters, being self-critical not only leads to anxiety, but then the anxiety can make your self-criticism worse, and it becomes this horrible loop. It's also been shown that one of the best protections against anxiety is self-compassion, which is one of the things that people with imposter syndrome and perfectionists are not very good at. So we need to learn how to improve our self-compassion and our self-care. Because truly it does take practice and patience for self-compassion and self-care to become a habit. So the first thing that I would ask you to do is to change where you look for validation. We're used to the external signs of success. We're trained into it from when we're young. Our parents and our teachers tell us that we're doing well. They give us good grades. And sometimes when we move on to a job or a career, we feel like we still need that validation, but it's much less easy to find. So we start looking to unhealthy sources for indications of whether or not we're succeeding. We want our bosses to tell us that we've done a good job. We want to be on the highest salary that we possibly can. We crave that next Twitter or Instagram like. And the problem with external validation is that it's fleeting. 1 or 2 likes on social media can feel good. A pay rise can feel absolutely great. But soon that feeling wears off, and we're back to feeling insecure again. The idea of self-validation is that you accept your own internal experiences, your own thoughts and feelings. It's knowing within yourself that you're enough and that your experiences are worthy. Accepting your own experience allows you to self-soothe when you get into that sort of panic state where your heart is beating fast and you're breathing irregularly. You can manage to get your emotions under control more effectively. So how do we learn to self-validate? Firstly, instead of resolving to instantly change your behavior, I'd like you to learn to recognize it. When you find yourself engaging in negative thoughts about yourself, or in procrastination, or in maybe checking your work Slack at midnight, or whatever behavior it is that you're concerned about, first acknowledge it and consider it. Once you've reached a point where you can notice yourself doing these things, then you can start to consider reasoning with yourself about why you might be doing it. And if you're feeling insecure, consider whether it's really you who's feeling insecure in yourself, or whether it's coming from a societal pressure. And don't berate yourself for this behavior. Just acknowledge it, accept that you've done it, and reflect on why. Consider what might be behind the issue, where that thought has come from, and how you can manage it in the future. Try and recognize your mean voice from your kind voice, and give less and less weight to that mean voice that tells you that you're not good enough, that you're not doing enough, and listen more to the kind one that says, maybe we should take a break now. We're starting to feel stressed. We'll probably feel better about this if we come back to it tomorrow. If you have trouble getting to sleep at night, it might be because you've not spent enough time during the day reflecting on your day and all of your experiences. You know, when you do that thing where you lie down to go to sleep and your brain does the whole, oh, remember that embarrassing thing that you did? We're going to go through it step by step and relive the whole thing, and you're just sort of lying there like sweating. Well, you can avoid that by spending some time before bed, just going over your day, thinking about how it went and how you felt about it. No phones, no screens, just you and your thoughts. And try and consider the facts, so don't make assumptions. I got 3 bugs fixed today, and I feel really good about it. That's a fact. I haven't worked on X bug, and it's making me slightly worried. That's also a fact. My friend cancelled on me for lunch, and I'm really quite annoyed. That's also a fact. Those are all valid. I'm a failure, and I'm no good at anything because I didn't get that bug done. That's an assumption. If you catch yourself doing that, try and consider where that thought came from. Are you being driven by a need for perfection? Are you believing the stories of capitalism, or dare I say it, the patriarchy? Stating the facts of your experience will help you to build trust in your own internal validation and will help you to catch those bad habits quicker. And if you need help to manage your procrastination, consider using a work timing technique, or like Pomodoro or something similar, where you measure out allotted time for work and time for breaks. There are a multitude of apps that are available to help you try this out. And if you have a tendency to work too many hours, try and cut down, even in half-an-hour increments, and see whether it makes a difference to how efficient you're being. I think you'd be surprised. If you're applying for jobs, don't be afraid to ask probing questions about how they support their employees to have good mental health. Find out whether or not they're even comfortable talking about it, because the chances are if they can't talk about mental health in an interview, then they're not going to be able to support you when you need it further down the line. Make sure that when you're working, you schedule in clear work hours and rest hours. That way you can't make yourself feel guilty about the fact that you're not working. And you'll also know when you should be checking those emails or those Slack messages and when you shouldn't, and when you should maybe just put the phone down. There are browser extensions, and I think both iOS and Android have the ability to block certain apps at certain times. Cut your tether to the workplace when you're not there. But the thing that I have to say is, all of these things take practice, and some of them are going to work for you and some of them aren't. And you need to figure out the things that work best for you and give them a chance. Be truthful with yourself about what is working and what isn't, and really try and build those good habits. And finally, get in touch with what helps to calm you when you're feeling anxious or tired, or you're just feeling in need of a little bit of me time. For some people, it's a walk around the block. For some, it's listening to music, meditation, taking a bubble bath. I like to go and get a bubble tea. But it has to be able to come from you and not from somewhere else. It should be things that reduce your blood pressure and don't raise it. So posting to Twitter doesn't count. That's external validation. Texting your crush also doesn't count. That's external validation. Eating a kilo of chocolate or drinking a liter of coffee also doesn't count. They're going to raise your blood pressure. Self-soothing is things that you can do for yourself that give yourself time to feel validated and happy. And why am I telling you all of these things? Because I never want anyone else to go through what I did. In case you haven't worked it out, the story about Mo was my story. And I felt alone and unsupported. And I really think that by talking about it, we can increase awareness and learning around mental health in the tech industry, because you all deserve to feel happy and comfortable, because the tech industry is a wonderful, empowering, and brilliant place to be, and you all deserve to be there. Thank you very much. I think we have quite a lot of time for questions, actually. Not a one, wow.
Hello,
Hey.
nice talk.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you if you have discovered all of these things on your own, or now you know any training course that could help anyone in your situation or your past situation to overcome.
So for
Thank
me,
you.
I discovered these things through therapy. I started seeing a therapist after I had the bike accident because I realized that I needed to actually deal with these things. And these are all things that my therapist has spoken to me about and has given me reading on. And the World Health Organization actually has some really amazing materials on things like catastrophic thinking and black and white thinking and how to recognize them in yourself. If you have the means, I cannot recommend getting therapy enough. Just talking to someone about your fears or your anxieties is amazing. And even if you only do it like once a month, I just highly recommend it. There's another one all the way up there.
Hi,
Hey.
nice talk.
Thank you.
I have one simple question. Once you realize you are going through the imposter experience and you try to do all the stuff you have just talked to us about and go therapy, go look for help, etc., does it end eventually?
I mean, I'm told that it does. It's a long journey. And like I said, the first step is recognizing it. And that's the stage that I'm at the moment. So when I hear my own head go like, this isn't good enough, you haven't done enough, you don't fit in here, I can hear that in myself and go, no, shush, I'm doing okay. But those thoughts are still there. And it takes years and years of practice because, I mean, I'm 30. I've had 30 years of building this bad habit, and breaking it realistically is going to take a long time. But it's worth doing.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. It was really nice. I have one question. Do you have any recommendations for how to make maybe your workplace, or what could your colleagues do to maybe make you feel safer or help you in any way? Thanks.
Yeah, it's a really tough one because there is a lot of stigma around talking about this kind of thing. So the way that I have dealt with it is by just being really open about it. And the more that I've talked about my own experiences, the more my colleagues have said, yeah, I actually feel that too. And that opens the channel for more communication. So if you've got a work Slack, one of the things that I did was start a mental health channel in the Slack where I just occasionally post being like, oh, I'm having a really tough day today, and everybody can, send me puppy photos or something. And we share when we're having a tough time, and we share support with each other. So Slack is a really lovely way of doing that without having the fear of actually talking about it out loud. But talking to your manager, I think, is super important so that they understand what you're feeling, and also recognizing your own triggers and recognizing when you're going into that panic state. And if you can get to the point where you can say to your team or your boss, like, I'm going into panic right now, I just need to go for a walk, then it makes it clearer that this is something everyone can talk about, and if other people are feeling the same way, then they're allowed to also say that they want to go for a walk. It's really about communication. If you can talk to your HR department about maybe getting a counselor in, something that I've tried in offices before, just to get somebody in the office like once a month. They sit in a room and people can book a half-an-hour appointment with them. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for your talk. I would like to ask you, how can you help people who they have the imposter syndrome?
So it's difficult because, especially when you see this in other people, you really want to help them and you want to tell them that, they're doing fine. And the best thing that you can do is be supportive and remind them when they're going through that you're there for them, that they're doing well, that maybe they should take a break. So one of the things that one of my friends does for me is occasionally she'll just turn up and be like, I bought you a bath bomb. I think that you maybe need to take some time out and have a bit of a break. And just being there and being supportive to them and reminding them to look after themselves is one of the best things that you can do as a friend and a colleague, and just being there for them to talk to and making sure that they know that you're there and you're supportive. Working through this kind of thing has to come from the person themselves. They have to accept that they want to make a change. So it can be really frustrating watching somebody go through this and being like, you need to talk to someone about this. It took me 2 years of a friend saying, maybe you should go to therapy. And I was like, I don't need therapy, I'm fine. Yeah, 2 years of them doing that before I eventually admitted that I did need some help. And it can be really tiring, but don't give up.
Hi, Joe. This was a really good talk.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. The first one I can't really externalize in a perfect way, so I'll just go ahead without thinking of it. I think public speaking is indeed a very scary thing to do. And what I observed was during the entire time you were very calm and it reflected in your voice. Is it something you've learned over the years of therapy and self-help, or is it something that is very natural? Because in situations such as public speaking or intense discussions, the calmness of the mind is challenged, and that reflects on the voice, and it manifests into body language. And I would like to know how you mastered it, because I think you have. And my second question is, a lot of the tech companies that are, let's say the big ones that we all want to work for, because they give us the scale, they give us historically the companies like Uber or Google or such and such have also been notorious for not giving the best mental health to their employees, and we have heard stories, which was something I reflected from the slide that you had. Capitalism encourages perfectionists.
Yeah.
So how do you really, coach people who are intelligent, want to work for the best, but also manage their mental health along the way, where you have, forget support, but I think you have some negative support in that. How would you encourage, having worked at Samsung, how would you coach us in that?
So to answer your first question, when I first started public speaking, I was terrified, and I got the fastness of breath and the creakiness of the voice. And I have given this talk a few times, so I am more relaxed in giving it. I find breathing exercises before you go on stage really help. I have a Fitbit that does a little vibration every breath, and it just makes you sort of calm yourself a little bit. And the one thing that makes the huge difference is practice. Practice, practice, practice. When you have a talk to give it out loud in your bedroom, give it to your team, record yourself doing it and listen back to it. Practice will make you much more calm when you're actually doing the public speaking. Another side to that, as a socially awkward person myself, I find public speaking actually easier than a group interaction, because the rules of engagement are a lot clearer. I'm talking, you're all listening. So I don't know if you want to think about it like that. That kind of also helps me to feel calm. As far as finding the right places that are going to be supportive, it's something that I have had to work on myself, because you do that whole the pinnacle of the tech career is working for Google or one of these giant companies, and if I'm not striving for that, then my perfectionism is like, well, you're not doing as well as you could be. But then you need to reframe what the pinnacle looks like, and whether that's a supportive environment that cares about you and helps you to be the best person that you can be. When you start to think about it like that, the Googles and the Ubers start to look a lot worse. So reframe your expectations is what I would say. Is that a good answer? Is that it? Are we done with the question? Oh, no, there's one more. Oh, we're done. We are done. Thank you so much, everybody.